The Knights of Ren podcast is brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., your source for Star Wars Destiny singles, sealed product, and more. Check them out at coolstuffinc.com.
Show me again the power of the darkness.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll. D20radio.com. Welcome back, everybody, to the Knights of Ren episode 224. With me this week is Jay. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. So Rick is not with us today. He's out winning his store championship for the Knights of Ren, hopefully. So we'll talk to him about that next week. But we do have a special guest. Nick is with us from the World Championship. He was the runner-up. And how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Just had a lot of Destiny in the last week. Probably played like 4 days, which is more than I'm used to.
Awesome. So we ask everyone this question when we bring them onto the show. What got you into Star Wars? Was it like a movie? Was it a book, a video game? What got you started?
I don't know. It's just, I was a kid and it was there. I watched it when I was probably less than 5 years old. I don't remember the first time I watched it. It's just been one of those things that's always been part of my life. So I've always followed Star Wars here and there. I didn't get a whole lot into the extended universe books though during 90s and all that, but yeah, otherwise.
So let's talk about Worlds for a little bit. You made it all the way up to the top 2, and what were you piloting, and why did you decide to pilot that specific deck?
I was playing the Elite Phasma Bala Trooper deck, and I had just played that deck a lot beforehand. It was one of the first like legendaries that I opened in my original packs, and I was like, oh, this is a cool card. Guardian sounds fun. Nice like control effect. I tried making some with like Phasma Trooper Night Sister to just have more Guardian, but it just didn't feel right, and I kind of put it away for a while, played some other stuff, and then a few months before Worlds, when I got the tickets, I was like, okay, I'm going to start picking my deck, or I was like, I want to play Phasma, and I was telling my friend, like, this deck's good, I think it's tier 1. He's like, nobody's talking about it, it's definitely not tier 1, you shouldn't play that. And I was like, just wait, people will talk about it. And then like a month, a few weeks before like Worlds, like just all the podcasts, everybody started talking about Phasma, and it's like, oh, see, I told you, but now everybody knows about it and it's going to be popular.
So what is one of the last minute changes you made before Worlds to update the deck?
The biggest one was probably adding on the hunt, because when I started playing it again, I had 2 on the hunts in there, and I absolutely hated it because it's an awful upgrade in terms of like damage output, and you don't really want 2 in like your starting hand. And most of the times it's like, I would rather have promotion in my hand, get an extra card, have like the focus side, like it just has more usable sides in most situations that don't cost resources to get use out of them. So I really like promotion, but knowing that there would probably be a lot of Han Rey and just other things that would use shields a lot, I thought it would be worth having one of in the deck, and it definitely paid off. That was probably my biggest payoff, was putting that in the deck.
So a lot of people we've talked to said they spent time going through a gauntlet. They went through a testing phase to tweak their deck, improve their deck, figure out inconsistencies, and tighten up the cost curve and the cards in the deck. What did you do in your testing in your gauntlet to tighten up your deck to get it to where it was?
I did a lot of testing with my friend Josh, who doesn't even live in the same city as me. He doesn't own any of the cards, and I just kind of told him, hey, you're going to get you Tabletop Simulator, and we're going to play. I'm going to make you learn the game, and you're going to be my playtest partner, because being able to play only once a week at a store wasn't going to be enough for what I wanted to test for Worlds. And I'll say that playing as much on Tabletop really helped a lot, and that's where I did so much of just like, okay, we're going to try out this card, try this out, just kind of really fine-tuning the deck there. That definitely gave me an edge over other people that didn't get the time to do that. And I still felt a little unprepared compared to talking to some of the Minnesota guys that had, 4 or more people that were able to work together all the time. A little jealous.
So what do you feel like you did that gave you the edge over them? Because, yeah, we've heard from the Minnesota team that there was a group of them that would just sit down and play all the time, and you still were able to get past all of them.
I don't know if I did anything different that made it me better than them. I think it was still just comes down to individual skill at some point. I'm not that I'm better than everybody else. It's just, and it comes with skill, comes with luck. I will say one thing is, when people talk about long day of Destiny, mental fatigue, that stuff has never been a problem for me. So after a long day of Destiny, I still feel sharp at the end of the day as I do usually at the beginning of the day, which might have some benefits that other people might find as a detriment.
Yeah, I talked to you like right after the event kind of ended, and yeah, you were already playing another casual game, just hanging out and talking to your friends, and that impressed me because I get fatigued pretty badly for long events personally.
So why don't you give us a quick rundown of going from top 16 to top 8, top 4 into top 2, because at that point you were playing best 2 out of 3. What did you see that you were able to capitalize on to get you up into that top 2? Because everyone had a completely different story and a completely different matchup, and it's just really interesting to hear that going from Swiss into best 2 out of 3, the game does change quite a bit.
Yeah, I really love the best 2 out of 3 format. If time permitted, I would prefer to always play the game that way. It just feels a lot more consistent and fair. My top 16 game was versus a guy that was playing Jabba Dooku with a pretty heavy control and mill variant, not super heavy on the damage. I don't think he might have killed my Stormtrooper in one of the games, but that's about it. The big thing that was really helpful is seeing the deck list, seeing that he was running 2 dodges, and being able to really play around that just by throwing, like, anytime I have a damage, just throw it out there. Just get it right out. Like, oh, we have a 1 and a +2. Okay, just get it out next action. Like never give him an opportunity to get more than, like, 3 damage off with dodge. And that just really helped.
That's something a lot of people actually haven't brought up, is when you're at these premier events and you get to top 16, you actually get to look at your opponent's deck list before you go into, combat playing that player. How beneficial was that for you when, you're moving up from top 16 to top 8? You know what this guy has. You go into top 4. Like, you know what to play around. Is that a benefit? Was it more or less just a quick glance at, okay, I know what's going on here. This is what I'm going to do?
I would say it's definitely a benefit, and it's definitely something that I'm happy that they did, especially at least after the cut, because if you come to an event alone, don't have people that can scout for you, you will be at a severe disadvantage if you don't get to look at other people's deck lists and see, like, oh, okay, this guy's playing 2 dodges, this guy's playing no dodges. Like there are tech cards that if people know that you're running things and you don't, you are just coming into a matchup at a disadvantage, and I think this deck list really helps fix that. And so I would definitely advocate for that. I mean, if your deck's entirely winning just on tricks alone, then that's probably not a deck that should win a major competition.
So what was one of the craziest things you saw happen either to you or against you while you were playing at Worlds?
I think I told this story on the other recap, but man, it's just the game that was the last Swiss game, that was my deck versus Vader Raider, and it came down to the Raider at like 1 health and my Balatik at 2 health. I had a backup muscle. He was going first at the start of a round, and he had like a mind probe, and he just had to roll, the special on the mind probe, the 3 damage on the mind probe, or the 3 damage on the Tusken Raider, and then I just would not have made it, but he didn't. And he probably had like a 55% chance there. And so that was like the coin flip of my tournament. Do you get to go to rank 2? I guess the answer was yes.
So it's interesting that you played more of a rogue-esque deck until it sort of like gained steam. First off, what stood out to you that made it seem like a tier 1 that maybe other people were missing? And also, was there a deck that you would have played otherwise, maybe even more rogue or like unexpected, and that kept you from playing it? Or would you have played something more traditional if this deck didn't work out in your testing?
I think the biggest thing was seeing how crazy like the Django Bala Trooper matchup, or like how crazy that deck performed in some of my local tournaments. I was like, wow, this deck just feels unbeatable. And that was for a while the thing is just like I cannot beat this deck. And that's just kind of when I just started going more into the Phasma. And it's like I feel like Phasma, like as more I played it, I realized I think Phasma's just a better version of that deck. You have a little bit less explosiveness and cheating with the Django actions, but I think what you gain from Guardian, a second red character to be able to use like best defense on, just gives you a more solid removal package than you can hope for with the Django variant of that deck. Because I mean, at the heart, they kind of are very similar decks, but a little different. The only other deck I had really played much of during the first few months was probably like Leia Akbar, which also would have been pretty rogue, but I don't know how like that was like the Vader matchup would have been just brutal. And I'm not even sure that it would do well against Han Rey that much. We only have like one guy that plays Han Rey at our store, so I didn't get a whole lot of practice against Han Rey even until like the few weeks before Worlds itself. And that was a deck that worried me a lot, actually, beforehand, and ended up having a very good record against it.
So when you're assessing these decks, what are you looking for that will give you the tools that you need? Because we would talk to people who say things like, I'm looking for cheap and efficient cards because you get tiny little bits of advantage over a long period of time. Some people are looking for options so that they can get themselves out of a situation when said situation arises. So what do you do to make your deck kind of in sync with your playstyle?
I think I like to make sure that there's, the right balance between the amount of control cards and the amount of like upgrades and damage dealing cards that you're running. The way that I like to run Phasma was much more of a let's try to get as much upgrades out early as we can. Not necessarily like have a lot of cheap cards, but just making sure that if we're rolling resources on the first round, definitely capitalizing on that, not necessarily using your cards to reroll, but playing out more upgrades and taking more resources to just kind of get ahead of your opponent, because honestly, I like rolling more dice than my opponent. The more dice I'm rolling, the more ahead that I feel in most games. And that kind of is a motivator behind my deck building style. I really like FN 2199, and his ability is just awesome. But what I don't like to do is just take his upgrade, override it with an upgrade, override it with an upgrade, override it with an upgrade, and then I'm still only rolling out like 3 dice total, when it's like, well, if I played a little bit slower, maybe I could have 4 or 5 dice and then start overriding upgrades after I kind of get my arsenal built up a bit. But that's just how I like to play it. I wasn't a big fan of Han Rey a lot too, because I'm not a big fan of just like hold out, overwrite, DH17 or DL44, whatever the one is that's the Han's blaster.
Do you have any tips or strategies to players who are trying to break into higher level competition, things that they might forget, or things maybe to consider to look out for in your opponent's play to help you get an edge?
Well, in terms of deck building, probably put control cards in there. It will really help you out. It'll help you more consistently win your games, and it takes a conscious decision to not always pitch the control cards when you need to reroll or at the end of the round. There's so much that's really hard to say, and you have to kind of play in the moment, but control cards are important. And actually watching what your opponent discards to kind of like get an idea of maybe how, if you've never played against them, what their playstyle is like. Are they throwing their extra upgrades out? Are they throwing their control away? Are they trying to be a little bit more reckless and just try to go for like big damage here, but kind of forgo any chance of controlling your dice? And that could set you up for a huge counterplay if you realize that they're playing in that sort of way. That's kind of, that might be hard to pay attention to in the midst of games. There's a lot of other stuff going on in your head at the time, but try to be aware of what they're actually discarding, especially at the end of the round too. That's pretty important.
Now that we've gone through Worlds, we are a couple weeks into the Spirit of Rebellion meta, and on top of that, we've got Store Championships on the way, and right after that, we're looking at GenCon and the Nova Open Series, which we're sponsoring, and there's just a lot of stuff coming up. Prizes have already been announced for Nationals, so it's a big season for players who want to hit these high-level tournaments to get swag, potentially a buy and a seat at Worlds for 2018. What are some of the things you're working on to get ready for these big championship and big local tournaments?
I'm actually just trying to figure out what deck I want to play at GenCon, even though it's a few months away still, but that's going to be my big event. I'm going to be at GenCon playing a lot of Destiny, and definitely just trying to figure out what I think is going to be the best deck for for that. But it's really hard in Spirit of Rebellion because the amount of deck archetypes has just gone through the roof, at least viable ones. Right now there's Poe Moz, which is just explosive and kind of a test for, like, do you have enough control to deal with Poe and still enough damage to kill him before they can kill you. There's Palpatine, which is another test of, like, do you have enough control to deal with his dice before he just burns down you with all his free damage that he gets for resolving. I don't know that Palpatine's really going to be one of the best decks out there going forward, but it really is that one that's like, if you can't beat this, you gotta assume somebody's going to be running it, and if that's what knocks you out of a major tournament, it's going to feel really bad.
I'd like to, take a moment and actually talk about that, because Palpatine's kind of on the fence in the community right now. Some people say he's really bad. Some people say he's really good. I have a friend who thought he was really good, and he took him to a tournament this weekend, and he just got crushed because people figured it out. What are your thoughts on the Palpatine deck in regards to viability?
I think it's still just, it'll come down to what the meta really settles on, especially locally. Obviously, a heavy control meta is not very good for Palpatine, but you kind of still have to have a good bit of damage to go along with that. I don't know how well he fares versus, like, the hero or villain mill decks. Haven't really tested that.
Not very well.
I guess the big thing is, if there isn't a lot of control, he'll probably be really good. If he draws cards like Force Illusion early, if he gets both Force Illusions early, that just drastically can increase the amount of health that he has. Like, you have a 15 health Palpatine, if you resolve some shields, you have 2 Force Illusions, like, you could be easily sitting at like a 25 health Palpatine, and then maybe he uses a Rise Again sometime in that game, and you got like a 30 health Palpatine, and that is scary. That's a full team's worth of, like, damage that you have to go through at that point, and his dice are definitely worth a full team's worth of damage.
So outside of control, since he only comes with 2 dice, what do you think are some other ways to counter the deck? Massive
Burst would probably work a lot of times, assuming he doesn't get Force Solution at the right time. But then again, Vibra Knives. So if you're running like a really bursty Rey deck with a lot of melee damage, with either like Obi-Wan or Double Padawans or Qui-Gon, just a lot of damage really fast, and if you can make it unblockable, that would still probably be really brutal for Palpatine, especially a 3-character list. If you're running like Rey and 2 Padawans, I think that would be pretty good against him too.
Yeah, in my experience trying to deal with Palp in my local meta, I mean, a lot of it has to deal with, like, does he get that holocron or does he get a really gross upgrade early on? Because as far as control goes, you definitely want to deal with his dice, because even if he resolves money, he's still dealing damage, and that adds up quickly over time. It gets really scary, but once he gets like a Force Lightning going, then you definitely want to deal with that card, and then that frees up his natural dice, and there's sort of a inevitability to fighting him where, if you don't have enough ways of dealing with his onslaught early, you're gonna lose characters pretty quickly. He's gonna no mercy you. It gets really scary really fast. So I noticed against Palpatine, like, turn 1 matters a whole lot and kind of sets the tone for the fight, and then seeing what kind of upgrades or types of options that become available to him sort of layer out the rest of the battle. So yeah, it's interesting, like, trying to have the right removal against him, and also, like, Guardian embarrasses him pretty hard, which is one good way to deal with him too, because that removes it and he doesn't get to do his trigger. But yeah, it's interesting, if he gets 1 or 2 turns where he gets to do what he wants, it gets really scary really fast.
Yeah, I mean, if it's your typical, all the holocrons come out, or you get holocrons and just you get some Force Lightnings, Force Throws, like, really early, it's going to be a really rough battle. It's not like, okay, well, they put a holocron, they got 2 Force Throws on Dooku. I guess we're going to burst down Dooku first. You don't burst down Palpatine first at that point, because he's the only guy, and you have a lot more health to chew through. It's just, you're going to be dealing with that all game, and it's going to be really hard to deal with, because at that point, like, you have Force Throws out there, you have, like, Force Lightning and a Force Throw, you have 4 dice that you now need to control every turn instead of 2, or you're going to be taking even more damage, and you're not going to be able to control 4 dice a turn.
Something you brought up that I also wanted to talk about was the Rey Double Padawan build. Team Covenant just had their Destiny weekend, and the winning deck was Rey Double Padawan. Now, we don't have the list, so we can't talk about exactly what was in it. The joke was there's a BB-8 in there for some reason, and people are trying to figure out why. But the fact that you already mentioned the deck, and not necessarily in conjunction with that tournament specifically, like, I've considered it, but what do you think makes that deck viable? Since, villains are really talked about, and they're very prominent, but I believe that there are some really strong hero decks available to players, and it's worth talking about them.
Just the Padawan ability to be able to ramp out stuff faster, which is really nice for Hero, because Hero doesn't have a lot of ramp, while Rey's still being just a huge threat now with, vibro knives and force speed. Like, Rey is a lot scarier than she was before, even if her dice are not the best ones, and playing with Padawans, her dice are a lot better. The Padawan's dice are actually really good, especially with Rey. I could see you just throwing out 10 unblockable damage in a turn and just being like, oh, there's nothing I could do about that because they took 4 actions, threw out 10 unblockable damage, and now one of my characters is dead. And I don't know, there wasn't really anybody playing that locally recently. I've seen people do it in Awakenings, but I don't know if... You probably want to kill Rey first there still, but if you get some loaded up Padawans, it's still going to be a really scary deck. The only thing that I have to say against it is just kind of the ever-presence of thermal detonators now with Poe Moz, with FN2199. If I don't know how much people are running thermal detonators in FN decks, but that's the other one I could think of that is more likely to have it other than Poe. But like, thermal detonator is just brutal for 3-character decks. I mean, if Poe has 2 thermal detonators in his opening hands, gets a special off, you basically have already lost the game, and there's nothing you can do about it. 2 Padawans at 1 health and Rey halfway dead. That's not a recipe for a good game.
Right. And, we're starting to delve into one of the most unique things about the SOR meta, and that's the fact that there's a lot, and I mean a lot, of options out there. I'm building a lot of weird decks. Jay's got something going. You've got something going. Rick is testing all kinds of different things. What do you think would be a good tip for our listeners who might feel overwhelmed? Because there are a lot of tier 1 decks, but there's also a lot of tier 1.5 decks. And, if you're a good enough pilot, you can get tier 1.5 and tier 2 decks to win tournaments because you're just a stronger player. But if someone's coming into this going, oh my gosh, there's just so much, like, what would you advise them to do to not feel so overwhelmed and find that focus for their deck?
I think first off, I'd say try to pick what kind of win condition you want to go for. Like, do you want to go for like a really aggressive mill? Do you want to go for try to survive as long as I can and, either mill them out or just beat them down slowly with damage? Do you want to be really, really fast? Do you want to be really control-y? Like, those are the kind of questions you might want to ask yourself first when deciding what you want to play, and then kind of either asking the community or just trying to figure out the characters that work best for that. And especially for a new player, I would suggest stick to 4 dice decks, not a 3 dice deck, and never run 2 dice deck unless you're running Palpatine. I've seen some new players that tend to run with like less dice, that it puts you at a little bit of a disadvantage. I think the more experienced players would be able to pilot those decks a little better, but just having the 4 dice will be a much more consistent deck to be able to play. I mean, I guess Vader Raider's another one that's fine with 3.
And what is it about having more dice on the field that you feel is beneficial to a player? More
dice feels like you can do more on your turn, be a little bit more consistent, making sure you don't also have too many expensive upgrades that you're not going to be able to pay for all game. Like, really keeping, like, if you want to start out, try making a really cheap upgrade deck and see how that goes, and just kind of add, more 2s, more of the 3-cost things. I mean, most decks probably don't want more than a few 3-cost upgrades unless you're using stuff like holocrons to cheat them in. There are exceptions, like Unkar being able to make a ton of money is one of them. Going for something like a Crime Lord deck is an exception, but those might also not be great decks for beginner people to play either.
Right. Crime Lord decks are extremely technical because you have to wager your cards in hand versus the money you can make, keep your characters alive long enough, and make sure you actually don't get your Crime Lord die removed where, you're just dead in the water. So yeah, that's my style of deck. So I can say a lot about it just because it's so much fun. It's neat to run a deck that deals no damage. So, people pull out their tokens. I'm like, just put the damage tokens away. I'm never going to deal any damage. And they're like, wait, what? And you don't.
Makes Guardian feel really bad.
Yeah, I actually really like seeing Guardian decks because I'm like, cool. You're never going to use that ability for any reason whatsoever. And, even though I'm running a thermal, the only time I ever cast it for the explosion is really when I'm fighting the clock, and I've got enough sustainability where I can throw out 6 to 9 damage off of one play, and now I'm winning the damage battle and the card battle, and they're like, oh my gosh. But realistically, it's not there for damage, it's there for mill, but that's a whole nother discussion altogether.
Yeah, I want to say the interaction with the after effects makes playing Django versus Jabba feel really good. Being able to use the fact that he has the after effect, and if you have the battlefield, you roll out like Jabba, who has fast hands and blackmail, you can basically completely disrupt that whole sneaky combo. And be like, no, I'm going to just make you reroll first, and then we're going to pay to remove blackmail, and now you can use fast hands, and then I'll roll in Django.
Right. Yeah, knowing the intricacies of the rules is very important, because if it's the other way and you're Jabba and you have the battlefield with fast hands and blackmail, you can roll and resolve blackmail before your opponent can stop you.
And if you're not playing against a deck that has any other after effects, it's even easier.
And that's just one of those little advanced things that knowing where the battlefield is versus how your cards work it's important, because if you whiff on that and someone gives you the $1 and now you don't have a blackmail die that you really wanted, it's like, oh, it feels so bad. I mean, gaining a swing of 2 in resources is still not bad, but sometimes you really want that die face because you need to resolve it. So it's just one of those interesting considerations that one way goes depending on who has the battlefield, and then if it's on your opponent's side, it's a totally different experience altogether.
So now that we've finished up the Awakenings meta and we've gotten a little time with SOR, what do you think of the state of the game now compared to, you were in the heaviest final, like Worlds was the last call, so to speak, for Awakenings, and that ended that era, and now we're in a new era. What are your feelings about the game now as you've gotten to play some SOR stuff?
I mean, I love the fact that there's so many new options, but it's also really scary because Awakenings at its heart was simpler. Like there were less options that were as top tier right now, and there still probably will be less as we move forward with Spirit of Rebellion, but like Awakenings was just a simpler, straightforward meta that was pretty much only damage decks. It was still just every match was still mostly a slugfest versus a slugfest, and now you don't even know what you're gonna get in Spirit of Rebellion. You could have mill on mill. You can have just like the hero mill that doesn't really take cards from your hand a lot, but just destroys your deck and just survives forever with ammo belt and second chance, and you're just kind of like beating down one character over and over and over again. They're not doing a whole lot of damage, and it's just a completely new way to play the game almost. And I don't know if everyone's prepared for that. I mean, I don't even feel prepared for that. If I had to go to GenCon next week, I am not confident by any means that I'd be able to do as well as I did at Worlds, because there's just so many unknown factors right now.
Well, we think that you'll be able to do well, so hopefully we'll see you there at Gen Con. I'm really excited to check that out.
Luckily, I have 3 months to prepare still.
Hopefully this time I'll be competing, so maybe I'll see you on the other side of the table.
So let's have some fun. What are some of the cards in Spirit of Rebellion that most intrigue you? Not necessarily power level wise, but for example, I've always wanted to play supports. And so people say things like, you can't do that. So my challenge right now is I'm going to make a super support deck, and Unkar is the thing that intrigues me the most. So like, what are some of the things that you look at and you go, I'm really interested in this?
Yeah, I mean, the support thing is definitely something that really caught my eye with that new battlefield, the docking bay, and the finalizer. That's awesome for supports. If you can move fast enough, I guess. Like even the Astromech, I'm not even convinced that card's that bad when you're playing with supports. Like, if you have enough money, 2's not that bad if you're playing like with an Unkar deck. So I mean, that definitely intrigues me. Some other specific cards, I really like Aftermath. The card that says when a character dies, it's a support, it's a cost 0. After a character is defeated, you gain a resource. It's both either yours or your opponent's characters. And if you're running a 3-character deck, or if they're running a 3-character deck, that thing could net you a lot of money in the long run and really just like push your economy forward in the mid to late game. That I'm a big fan. I don't have a deck right now that I really like with it. I had made a Phasma deck for Spirit of Rebellion that I played for a little while, but then I kind of gave up on it for a little while now too. But I was definitely running Aftermath as kind of a replacement for Logistics, but I still might want Logistics for the early game.
So I'm curious, since you came so close to taking the whole event, and one of the most interesting prizes, again, is that if you win Worlds, you get to help develop a future card for Destiny. Was there any type of card or character you were hoping to maybe make had you gone all the way?
Yeah, I think the one I was thinking about most was the Bendu, the neutral force wielding character from Star Wars Rebels. And just like the fact that I don't know if it would be like a neutral character or what. I picture it being like a really expensive Palpatine, like just like this guy's really powerful and has, you only running with 2 dice, but he could do some really cool stuff.
Man, that's actually really interesting. I'd like to see that, because if he was neutral, I wonder how they would build that. Okay. Another question I'd love to get your thoughts on is people are discussing Poe and Moz as a deck. Lots of people are piloting it. It's taking some tournaments, but more or less it's kind of becoming essentially similar to the Django Veers deck, where people are just, it's on everyone's tongue. Some people don't know how to beat it. Some people say it's the best thing ever. Some people just are tired of what it is. What are your thoughts on the deck overall?
I haven't played a lot of it locally. I've played a good bit of people with it online, or tested using it myself online. It feels like even more consistent than like most of the other aggressive decks, aggro decks would be from Awakenings. And I think that's the scary part. It's really straightforward on what it needs to do, and it doesn't have to draw insanely well or roll insanely well to perform those. That's what makes it more consistent. And while being able to control a Poe die every turn is an answer, you can't always do that. Your opponent doesn't necessarily, or like whoever's playing against Poe Moz doesn't necessarily draw into their control, or they aren't able to like roll out to be able to use like a he doesn't like you or a Loth Cat and Mouse. Like you can't necessarily even outpace the deck fast enough, because if you hit and run and then roll out Moz, resolve one of the Poe dice, claim and use Emperor's Throne Room, and the next turn you like I get to roll out and I don't even get to control any of your dice beforehand. Like it can be countered with control, but it still feels really hard to deal with if you get a bad draw. Another comment with that deck is I feel like right now it might be kind of stifling a little bit of the rest of the meta, where certain decks could be pretty viable all around, but they can't deal with Poe Moz. Thus, they kind of just get choked out of the meta if Poe Moz is being run a lot, and that kind of feels bad. And that's kind of along the lines of where like 3-character decks feel a little risky right now, because if you do run against Poe Moz and they do get those thermal detonators, nothing feels worse than almost instant loss.
Yeah, that it is a tough matchup with multiple characters. It's one of those weird kind of things with Destiny where 2-character lists are strong, 4-character lists have more health, but because there's a lot of damage that's spreadable, it makes these multi-character lists tough. And we've talked to Lucas, and he even said they didn't want Swarm to just crush the meta, and so it's clear they've made counter to Swarm. But the problem is maybe the counterplay is just a little bit too strong, where I've seen people in my meta who run like a TIE Pilot, Guavian Enforcer, Trooper, and the deck has a lot of potential, but like you said, someone will hit a thermal and it's just like, well, there goes 3 health on these characters, and now you're kind of hurting to play the best defense. You have to be a little bit more conservative with where you're spreading out damage if you're running Guardian, if you have a Phasma. So it's just really interesting that I don't think Poe Moz is the deck to end all, but it does complicate the meta because if you don't have any way to deal with it, on average, it can probably outpace you in a punching war.
And the problem again is like, yeah, I understand we definitely need to have something to keep swarming decks in check because, you know, if you get the squad tactics kind of out there and with all the or you get just 2 wingmans out there and you're rolling out, all your guys at once and you just have a ton of guys, tons of guns, and that can be a little toxic and hard to deal with. But the problem with the thermal detonator stuff right now, I think it's just the fact that you can use it, and not just on Poe, but even on FN2199. It's damage that comes directly from hand that you have no way of interacting with in any way, shape, or form. You can't say, well, all you had to do is control it. Well, Poe's already going to get probably 1 special every turn, and if he has a thermal detonator, he's going to use it. I guess you could discard it from his hand if you get lucky, but if you're running multiple character decks, you're probably not running a lot of discard either.
Yeah, in Magic terms, it's essentially a burn spell, and that's kind of how you have to approach some of these decks. When we were talking to Steven from Team Covenant, you look at a card like Take Cover, and traditionally you see, okay, it's a shield, so essentially it's an extra health. But with Qui-Gon, it turns into a multifaceted card where you can use it for health, or you're using it as a burn spell where you just got a free damage for 0. And so it's really interesting how cards, as they're printed, are not necessarily played as the card is intended to be played.
Yeah, because of the different character abilities, but that's what makes the game awesome too.
Yeah, it's really nice that the game is not linear. I feel like that would be terribly boring if, a card that said you get a shield, that's all it ever did, and then, you just know for a fact that it will never do anything else, but because of things like Qui-Gon, you can utilize those shields with a riposte, or you can use it for a quick damage. You can throw so many cards to the wayside with just traditional printing and just say, thermal detonator, it's a mass burn spell, or you can use Crime Lord for some funny shenanigans. With Unkar, you can eat these numbers that you didn't traditionally care about. Now you can mill and make resources. Like, everything's just kind of different, and it's good. It's a lot of fun.
You also have U-Wing that also does, it's like the 2 damage to all characters. It's another scary card.
U-Wing's very very interesting because you can either focus fire someone down, or you can throw out just wave of damage.
Yeah, U-Wing's actually a card that does intrigue me. I wonder if there's a deck that can actually play it as like a real vehicle, or if there's ever a time that you would ever actually take the 2 shields to all your characters over the damage if you roll that special.
So, something I noticed and may have underestimated is Quad Jumper. Now, I will say, overall, in the grand scheme of all the decks in Destiny, it's probably not that great of a card. It doesn't do damage. The 2 focus is nice, and the 2 printed resources are nice. But most decks really are aggro still, so it's a lot of slugfest. But the ability to play it for 3, make a resource, or double focus into more resources or damage or whatever you need, and then, as an action, sacrifice the jumper to play something for 3 less. That's a really nifty ability, because in my Uncard deck, I can usually get that on the field, and then either in the same turn or the next turn, use the double focus, make Unkar make $3, and then play ATST and swing in heavy. Or you could use it for something like U-Wing, where, the next turn you get $2, and you just roll that $2 into the U-Wing after, you roll out the Quad Jumper, obviously, to get the most benefit. But just being able to pay for a big card over a period of time is a lot easier than having 6 resources just in one go, because that's a very telegraphed play. I think, if you're running Quad Jumper and then you jump into U-Wing, it's possible, especially since you're probably going to run red and yellow in conjunction. So, Poe Moz is a really easy way to look at that. You can even quad jump into a Falcon. It's just really neat how it catches people off guard, because they see 2 resources and they think, okay, whatever. But in your head, you see a Millennium Falcon or an ATST. You can see what those resources are, and your opponent doesn't necessarily see it as that, because they're like, 2 resources, that's removal, or a gun, or, if you roll Poe, you shoot 2, 3 for 1s, whatever. That's not always the case. So having Quad Jumper online does make your resources more flexible. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I certainly like that. That card is really good in those vehicle decks. There's no doubt about it, and it's not like, I wouldn't call it the most... The legendary that I want the least. It's definitely not that, but it definitely it might not be in a deck that's going to be top tier, but for the decks that it does go in, it's pretty much undeniably powerful.
So, once again, thanks for joining us. It's been really awesome having you here. I really liked the brief chance I got to talk to you at Worlds, and again, I'm hoping to see you at GenCon, but I want to ask, what was your favorite, memory event happening throughout all of Worlds?
I think it was just meeting so many people. Like, as fun as the games were and playing and everything, like, just having that many people in one room that are all interested in the exact same thing that you are is something that I don't get to do very often. Even going to something like Gen Con, you have a lot of different types of board games, not so many people all there for that exact same thing, but like when you're there and there's, hundreds of people that are interested in Star Wars and Destiny, like, it's just fun to talk to, so many different people. I probably talked to at least 60 different people that I'd never met before in my entire life. And it was just cool to talk to new people and meet them. And your guys' meetup on Friday night was just an awesome, like, hey, we're all here. We all love this podcast and we all love Destiny. And this is just fun and just a good time. Hopefully we can do more of something like that at Gen Con too.
Yeah, definitely. I still have to plan a lot of stuff, but hopefully we can set up something cool. So lastly, as we like to ask all our guests, do you have any questions for us?
What do you guys think is the most underrated card so far of the set?
So a card that I find really interesting that doesn't seem to have a deck right now, but I am excited to see what kind of options open up for it, as more sets come out. But I really love Now You Will Die, which allows you to resolve a die as melee damage instead of whatever sides it's showing. We don't have a lot of heavy non-damage sides except from cards like Blackmail, but I think being able to just sort of, it's a worse Force Strike at the moment, but I'm hoping there's a deck that emerges, maybe some kind of combination with Jabba or something where you can do a lot of unexpected, like, sort of, I call it like sucker punch damage, where you're able to, 2 disrupt where you're not showing any money, well, take 2 and suddenly one of your guys is dead. Like, those are my favorite kinds of cards. Like, that's why I like Armed to the Teeth and Fight Dirty, and I got really excited with Now You Will Die, and I'm hoping that card finds a home and finds a deck and can maybe, if it becomes too reliable to deal like 3 damage, maybe it'd get kind of gross. But then again, like, you have to roll a side that you don't want to use normally and it still costs a resource. But I really like Now You Will Die, and I hope it finds a home.
Yeah, I think that actually might be decent in like a Jabba Vader deck where, you have Vader that is only with 1 die. He might have like a Vibra Knucklers on him or something like that. You have the potential to, if they're running like a 2-character deck, kill off one of their characters. And if you can kill off one of their characters in like by turn 3, your chances of like surviving to finish like milling them out is probably a lot higher if you can just get one of their guys off the board, and something like that would probably be pretty sweet.
I actually have a card for both hero and villain. The hero card I find most underrated is surprisingly Spirit of Rebellion. So it gives you a shield for 0. It's a red card, but if you have another copy of it in your discard pile, you get 2 shields. So after talking with a lot of people, I'm looking more into 0-cost cards that do things. And in my red decks, being able to get 1 shield for 0 is really good, but like mid to late game, being able to get 2 out of that is just really strong, because that's essentially turning off a single die, and 2 life, 2 damage, that's a pretty heavy swing, especially if you consider how you have to pay $1 to cast Field Medic. So it's not necessarily a field medic, but it has a similar result if you're not dealing with things like Vibro Knife or unblockable damage. So I find that most people don't expect that, especially when I play it. I'm like, 2 shields, and they go, wait, what? And now they thought they had me, or they were close to lethal damage, and now I'm sitting on a perfectly fine character, and so they redirect the damage off to somebody else. And so it's a very punchy card that doesn't cost you anything. My favorite, most underwhelming card, I guess you could say, is by far Friends in High Places. That card has won me a lot of games because it's a twofold card. Being able to look at 3 cards if you really think about it, is a little bit more than half of a turn in card resources. So you've gotten a bit of an edge in seeing your deck, and being able to get one of those cards for free is really phenomenal. Even if you get a zero cost card, which you regularly do not have that happen. So you're going to generally get something in the range of 2. On average, you might see a 1, you might see a 3, but generally in the decks I'm building, you get a free card that costs approximately 2 resources. And the speed and potency of that card throws people off, because being able to draw cards, play one for free, and now, if you know how to card count, you're aware of what options are left in your deck. It's super great, because now you can determine if you need to pitch cards to draw into things you need, or if you just got the thing you needed, now you can, use your resources for other things. And so it really helps your economy curve, and it helps you get through options that you may have not seen and lived long enough to get to. And I find that to be very interesting, because the funny thing about Jabba and Unkar dice is they're high enough, and people don't worry about them as much because they're not damaged. So if you're showing like a buttload of discard, they freak out a little bit. But if you're showing like a bunch of disrupt and money and focus, nobody cares. Nobody pulls those dice symbols off. But then you go, all right, I've got 7 showing, friends in high places, get a free crime lord. Then they care, because they done goofed, and you just got a 4-drop for 0, and it's just so impactful in the games you play.
Since Suji said 2, I want to toss out one more. I'm going to cheat. I really also hope that eWeb placement sort of finds a place, because I think that card is deceptively really, really strong for very good damage sides. Like, even if you don't control the battlefield, it's 1 ranged for 1 resource, 2 ranged for 1 resource, 2 shields, and then its effect is if you have the battlefield, increase all these values by 1. I mean, it's a way to generate 3 shields. It's got 2-3 damage sides, once it's air quotes turned on, and even the 1 damage pay side turns into what you usually pay for when you pay for a pay side. And with cards like Imperial War Machine, I think this card could get really nasty. I look at it and it's kind of like, I lament over I really like TIE Fighter, and I wish TIE Fighter was stronger, and I kind of wish it was more set up like this. But I think eWeb placement is really brutal, and if you can find a way to make it work either through a very aggressive deck, or it's also for a deck that streams lockdown, having multiple red characters to take the battlefield like before a resolution step, and then blow a few holes in your opponent. I think it's pretty good, lower costed support.
All right, so we're going to throw you a curveball and flip that question right back at you. What do you feel is one of the more underrated cards coming out of the new set?
A few that I've been playing around with. One is Bolt Hole, which just seems like, even if you're playing like an aggressive deck, that's the remove one of your yellow character dice to give that character 2 shields. It costs 0 though, so it's kind of like a mini dug-in that you don't need the battlefield for, that all you have to do is remove one of your dice. And if you have a blank and don't feel like re-rolling, that's just 2 shields for free. I think it's better to run than something like Take Cover in certain decks. But I don't know if it's going to be great, but it's just, to me, it seems like something that could be decent. I also, another defensive card that I'm interested in that I think might be decent is Armor Plating, because at least against damage decks, Armor Plating is another one that's kind of like removal that you play before, like it's proactive removal. Like you're like, okay, this character is going to take 2 damage eventually, and I'm basically paying for my electroshock now to be able to have more money later for when you do still do that damage to the character.
The other great thing about armor plating, too, I throw armor plating in all of my yellow lists right now. You can also overwrite it, so you can set it up preventively, or you can try and, set the tone like, I want this character to be a little more protected, so sometimes they go after the other one. It happens. But, being able to just let it lie, it's an option if you want to pop it or not. Sometimes I'll flip that into a Vibro Knucklers like nobody's business.
Yeah, those 2 cards, though, I've not seen anybody play with them locally yet. So maybe they're not actually underrated, but they've been underplayed so far.
Well, I mean, this has just been a lot of fun. We really appreciate your time. We've been more than happy to have you come on the show, and just really appreciate your thoughts and ideas about Destiny. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a great time too. hope to do it again sometime.
I agree. So thank you everybody for listening. It has been a really great Worlds event. This is pretty much our last discussion about that as we start to go heavy into the SOR meta. We're going to be talking about, our preparation for the store championships and, getting ready for Gen Con. So thank you everybody for listening. We hope you have a great week, and may the Force be with you.